Good evening to our global audience. We are at the Atlantic Council studio, recording live. My name is Jennifer Gordon, and I'm the director of the Atlantic Council's Nuclear Energy Policy Institute. And I am so delighted to be here this evening where we are launching our new report. It is online and also available in copy, in print. The report is called The Imperative of the Versatile Test Reactor for Nuclear Innovation, and it addresses the role of the Versatile Test Reactor, the VTR, in the nuclear energy innovation ecosystem. And it was co-authored by Jackie Toth and Khalil Ryan from the Good Energy Collective. And I'm delighted to have our roster of speakers here in the studio this evening. We have John Kotek, who is Senior Vice President of Policy and Public Affairs at the Nuclear Energy Institute. Kamal Pasha Mehmetoğlu, who is a non-resident Senior Fellow with the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center and the former Executive Director of the Versatile Test Reactor Program at Idaho National Laboratory. And Jackie Toth, who is Deputy Director of the Good Energy Collective. So, Kamal, in talking about this report, I want to turn to you first because until your retirement earlier this year, you had served as the executive director of the VTR program at INL. Could you provide us with a brief overview of the VTR and explain how it relates to the next generation of advanced reactors and fuel?
Thank you, Jennifer. I'll go very quickly over what VTR, how it was conceptualized, what was envisioned to be. Obviously now it is was as opposed to is, but I'm also hoping that whatever we've done, we put together is going to serve as the roadmap for the next version of VTR, however it's called. It is a test reactor. Its purpose is to test advanced innovative materials, fuels, sensors, and instruments. It does not generate electricity. The core is designed and it's optimized to produce the maximum amount of neutrons, high energy neutrons, over large volumes so that we can insert experiments into those volumes and test them to be used in the future in commercial reactors. The reactor itself, it's a sodium-cooled 300 megawatt reactor. But inside the core, we have isolated loops to be able to test different reactor concepts. For example, if you're interested in lead bismuth or lead-cooled reactors, there's a flowing lead loop inside the reactor that you can put fuels and materials in and test those. Similarly, we have molten salt loop, a helium loop, and a sodium loop, even though the reactor itself is sodium, but we also want to be able to push the boundaries of what the sodium reactors can do, so we can operate in the loop at higher temperatures and different pressure drops, different flow rates. So it is a test reactor in that respect. It also has the capability of being able to insert very quickly small samples and take them out while the reactor is still operating without shutting down the reactor. It was originally conceptualized that it will be online in 2008, 2009 timeframe. We thought that timeframe was consistent with the US strategy in advancing the advanced reactors. It is certainly not a substitute for any of the advanced reactors or any of the demonstration reactors. What it was envisioned to do is to test fuels and materials once those demonstration reactors are operating, to start inserting the next generation of fuels and materials and advancing and innovating the technology at a fast rate between the demonstration phase and a full-scale commercialization phase. So it is not intended for advancing the existing light water reactor fuel, even though the accelerated neutron damage testing, we were thinking that we could use those for some of the materials for the existing fleet as well.
And I want to stay with you for one more moment. Just for the benefit of maybe a more general audience. So the impact of the VTR on these materials and fuels that you're testing, talk about this 1 to 10, 1 year versus 10 years.
Yeah, typically the fluxes that we are going to generate in VTR is about an order of magnitude higher than, well, 2 orders of magnitude higher than the typical light water reactors that we operate today, and close to an order of magnitude higher than a commercial reactor that will be operating in the fast spectrum. So with that, that means in layman's term is that you can do experiments 10 times faster than you would in a commercial reactor.
Thank you, Kamal. Jackie, I want to go to you because you and Khalil Ryan at the Good Energy Collective co-authored this report that, of course, we're talking about this evening. And I'd like to hear more about the work of the Good Energy Collective and how your research and findings in this report also align with the broader ethos of your organization.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Jennifer. And I just want to say a quick thank you to you and to the Atlantic Council. I mean, you've been key thought partners for us on this work over the last year and a half, and really great to be here with Kamal and John as well. Yeah, I mean, my colleague and I were really pleased to be able to spotlight this need for developing a fast spectrum irradiation capability in the United States. So to answer your question, Good Energy Collective is a progressive nuclear policy organization. And in the nuclear policy space, much as in many industry spaces, a lot of the policy ideation and investments tend to go toward enablers for particular companies or developers to succeed. And at our organization, we look at what are the additional policy levers that incorporate community-centered, socially informed considerations that can go a long way toward kind of bolstering and supporting this build out of new advanced reactors that we all want to see in the United States for climate reasons, for community support reasons, et cetera. As well as we look for different investments that we can make as a country that support, not just necessarily 1 or 2 developers, but a multitude of stakeholders nationally and globally. And really for us, the Versatile Test Reactor is one of those rare technologies that really fits both of those criteria. So I'll just briefly talk about what I mean there. So, the kinds of data that Kamal's just talked about that you can really access on by running tests in the VTR on fuels, sensors, materials, instrumentation. That's exactly the kind of data that developers, operators, and the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission are going to want to see in the coming years as these as new advanced reactors come online to make decisions around how long can our reactor or its components operate safely into the future as they're exposed increasingly to neutrons over time. And likewise, with the VTR, it would function as a public user facility to the point where it would be benefiting not only advanced reactor vendors, but also a range of university stakeholders, and importantly, also many of the United States international partners, which I'm sure we'll get into later.
Absolutely. Jackie, thank you so much. John, I want to turn to you because you're at NEI, which means that you see the entirety of the nuclear energy industry. So from that industry perspective, could you talk about the need for a US-based fast neutron testing capability? And another question to kind of add on to that, if some of the companies that we're talking about are actually able to have their first demonstrations, as Kamal alluded to as well, before the US has a VTR, what then is the need for the VTR?
Yeah. No, great questions, and thanks again for the opportunity to be here. From a broad industry perspective, you look at how we got to where we are today with nearly 20% of our electricity coming from nuclear power, with the US having led the first global wave of nuclear energy development and outside the former Soviet Union. It was built on a set of capabilities that our country invested in decades ago. So where Kamal and I once worked at our National Laboratory site, they built more than 50 test and research reactors on that site. And many of them were the ones that set the sort of the technical groundwork for what became the commercial nuclear industry. There's also a lot of work done for the Navy and for other applications too. But so when we think about what this next generation of nuclear reactors is going to look like, one of the gaps in that, the skill set, the capability set that we have is fast irradiations. And so I think we know we're going to need the ability to do those sorts of irradiations going forward to support the full range of advanced reactor technologies that are seeking to come to market. We should also note that the existing research capabilities, things like the Advanced Test Reactor, the high flux isotope reactor, they're both more than 55 years old, right? And so while investments are being made in those to ensure that they can continue to run reliably over the long term, at some point in time, you're going to have to make an investment in the next generation of technology. And there's so many other things that building this would do for the U.S. nuclear sector. It would show renewed leadership, for example. It would build excitement. It's the sort of thing that people, smart people like Kamal, not like me, right? But young PhDs or other researchers, you want to go work on something like that. You want to have access to a capability like that. It's the sort of thing that's going to bring the best, not just from U.S. universities, but from around the world to work in the U.S. And then to your question about, well, if these companies can demonstrate they're first of a kind, so why do we need something like this? I love to go back to the example of naval reactors, because when they started in the 1950s, you had submarines that were operating for about 18-month fuel cycles. Today, it's life of ship, right? And so how did they go from 18 months to 30 plus years? Well, it was the Advanced Test Reactor. Before that, it was, we called the MTR, the Materials Test Reactor, the Engineering Test Reactor, and other capabilities that were there in Idaho and across the broader DOE system that enabled the fuel and materials and other advances that were needed to make that happen. The same sorts of advancements can be achieved if we build the necessary toolkit to support the full range of next generation nuclear.
Absolutely. So I want to stay on what you started talking about, which is the history of testing capabilities that we've had in the United States. Kamal, could you give us an overview of the capabilities that have existed in the past in the U.S.?
Yeah, that will be a very long talk, but I will briefly summarize it. Yeah, John already mentioned that we had 54 reactors built, operated, test at the Idaho site, and we had reactors in other DOE laboratories as well. So the big ones, the big one currently certainly is the Advanced Test Reactor. But we have done things in terms of testing and preparing the current nuclear energy fleet that today, if we mention it, most people will probably say, no, we cannot afford it. We have built reactors at the Idaho site for the purpose of destroying it. We built a reactor to run a severe accident, destroy the reactor, collect the data, and that data is still being used by NRC and by the vendors, reactor vendors, as part of their safety basis. So there is a lot of history in terms of the test reactors. Today, we only have two. We have the ATR, which is the main workhorse for us. The high flux isotope reactor in Oak Ridge, it's not designed as a test reactor. Its purpose is to produce isotopes. But because it has a high neutron flux, and it has small volumes where we can insert experiments, we use it as a test reactor as well. Now, we had a fast test reactor in the United States. We built it. We operated it for about 10 years. We shut it down. It wasn't because there was anything wrong with the reactor. It was because at that time, we decided that nuclear is not going anywhere. It was right after the 3 Mile Island accident, and a lot of orders were being canceled. So therefore, we didn't think it was going to get used. It was called Fast Flux Test Facility at the Washington Hanford site. And we had EBR-2, Advanced Breeder Reactor 2, a smaller fast reactor also operating at the Idaho site that was shut down at the same time as well for the same reasons. Now, you mentioned the demonstration reactors, and one of the demonstration reactors that we are building today, and I am almost 100% certain that it's going to be successful, is a fast spectrum sodium-cooled reactor. And the way it is going to start and operate is based almost 100% on the data that we collected in FFTF and EBR2. Now, what's beyond that? How are we going to get to the next generation of fuels and next generation of materials in those reactors is what VTR was going to play a role. But the data we collected back then in those facilities is enabling us today to be able to do those demonstration reactors. If we didn't have those, we wouldn't have these demonstration reactors either. If we haven't been collecting data on TRISO fuel in the last 20 years in ATR, we wouldn't be able to do the other demonstration reactor. So these test reactors are crucial in advancing the technology, but also in plowing the new ground and being able to switch from light water reactors to other type of reactors.
Thank you, Kamal. So I think we're kind of filling in or painting a picture of the different puzzle pieces and understanding the role of testing capabilities for the demonstration reactors. John, you mentioned the role of testing capabilities for the nuclear submarine fleet. But John, I want to ask you about the existing fleet in the United States. What have these testing capabilities meant for the current fleet?
Yeah. So Kamal started to touch on this. So much of what is in use today in the commercial industry traces its roots back to research and testing capabilities that the Department of Energy established. Kamal talked about run-to-failure tests, for example, that they did out at the Idaho National Lab site. Things like the loss of fluid test that was done in the aftermath of the 3 Mile Island accident provided some really helpful data. More recently, using facilities like ATR and others to demonstrate, well, initially high burn-up fuel, taking fuels, put it in lay terms, the ability to keep the fuel in the reactor longer, right? So enable longer fuel cycles, generate less in the way of spent fuel volume, relied on those capabilities. Now it's what they call accident-tolerant fuel, different fuel types that are being demonstrated and now planned for commercial use have relied on those capabilities. And it's not just the existing fleet, things like the TRISO fuel, right? So the silicon carbide and other fuels that are being examined for advanced reactors. All of these things have drawn on that extensive set of capabilities. And so you really can't imagine today's fleet without the sorts of advancements that have been enabled by really smart, forward-thinking investments in nuclear capability decades ago.
Thanks, John. And Jackie, I want to get to you in one moment, but Kamal, let me just ask you one quick follow-up on this testing capability question. Can you talk a little bit about some of the quantitative gains that the current fleet has obtained from existing infrastructure?
Oh, I really appreciate that question, Jennifer. I was going to follow up on John's answer. I think John already qualitatively mentioned it, but I think some of it is easy to quantify. And John mentioned the burn-up, that in 25 years ago, we were operating the reactors at about half the burn-up that we have today. And if you convert that quantitative numbers, today we operate the fuel cycles at around 18 to 24 months. Every 18 to 24 months, we shut down the reactor, refuel it, and shuffle it and refuel it. The cost savings to a utility today, in today's price, for doubling the burn-up is about $15 million a year. Over 100 reactors, that's $1.5 million. During the lifetime of the reactor, that's more than $100 billion. So when people start talking about these test facilities being expensive for a few $1 million, expensive and cheap, of course, is a relative term. But the other example I want to give you is during the time when we were shutting down reactors and we weren't building any new reactors in this country, between 1980s and 2000s, we were gaining on the efficiency of the reactors at an incredible phase. We went from, in less than 10 years, or maybe less than 15 years, we went from 60% availability to over 90% availability. So if you're operating a 100 reactor fleet on average, That is basically building 30 new reactors over 15 years. Even though we weren't building any reactors, but we were gaining equivalent of 2 reactors. I don't want to speculate what the cost of the reactor is. Today is different than it was when we were building them in many's per year, but that amounts to more than $100 billion by itself as well. So when people are talking about these test facilities being expensive, I really hope that they look at it in relative terms.
Yeah, can I just add on that too? I mean, I remember a couple years ago when I was an energy reporter, I would be, harassing Kamal for the numbers on, how much is it going to cost? What's the latest cost estimate for the product? And to your point, it's just so important to contextualize. There is an upfront cost to a test facility of this magnitude and this level of importance and capability. But it's so important to think about, not only the reactor benefits, but also the local economic benefits. Not to preempt maybe what your question was. But,
Absolutely. No, thank you,
Right.
Jackie. I mean, again, this cost-benefit analysis I think is really important and extremely nuanced. And Jackie, I want to go to you because, I think that we're having this conversation about the role of the VTR in the nuclear energy innovation ecosystem, and I think really understanding why we need the VTR in addition to the advanced reactors, the advanced fuel, et cetera. But your report really talks about other benefits as well that the VTR could bring beyond innovation. For example, you mentioned partnerships, innovation across scientific fields, economic benefits, local communities. Yep. Can you go a little bit more into some of those areas?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the benefits really abound. I would say, for one, the U.S. Department of Energy has identified the Idaho National Lab as the preferred site for the construction of an eventual VTR, and in their environmental impact statement have identified that you could achieve up to 588, full-time new jobs on site from the operation of that reactor. So this is, one of the crown jewels of the United States, our national labs out in Idaho. That's meaningful, right? Those are well-paid jobs, and it's important to be able to facilitate that. So yeah, certainly when the VTR project was ongoing, we were seeing a lot of phenomenal, partnerships between, at the time of the, momentary shelving of the project, I believe 19 universities were involved in project development and execution, as well as 6 national laboratories plugging in, and 9 industry partners too. So again, those are really meaningful commitments and relationships. Kamal and I, we used to talk about how, graduate students were really building out their, careers, their studies around working on various aspects of the project. So hopefully, that would revive again at some point. And so, John earlier was talking too about, it's so important for young students today to see themselves in this, this nuclear revival. And the VTR was one of the early stage, investments that the federal government was making that really do show that kind of, you can have a fulfilling career in nuclear that's so important for young folks to see today, as we're not only trying to retain our existing domestic nuclear workforce of engineers and other laborers, but also to grow it, commensurate with the level of build out we're all hoping to achieve in the next couple of years.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And I want to turn a little bit and talk about nuclear energy and geopolitics, because of course this is the Atlantic Council, this is our bread and butter, and we talk a lot about how we cooperate with our international partners and allies, but also how we compete against our adversaries. So, as we know, in nuclear energy competition, or innovation rather, our main competitor really is Russia, and specifically Russian state-owned nuclear enterprises. So, Kamal, from a technical perspective, talk to us about Russia's sodium-cooled Bohr-60 test reactor and the high-flux fast test reactor, the MBIR, that Russia is building, and what are the implications of Russia having those capabilities before the United States?
Thank you, Jennifer. Well, Russia strategically made the decision years ago that they are going to play in the fast reactor market. And so they have, not only they have the testing capabilities, the infrastructure, the innovation infrastructure, as we refer to it, but they do have 2 operating fast reactors as well, producing electricity. And over the years, they are now operating at more than 80% availability, which 10 years ago, if somebody said that Russia will do that within 10 years, nobody would have believed it. They are doing that. When they have those two commercial reactors that they are operating, at the same time, they are continuing to do experiments in their Bor 60 reactor, which is similar to VTR. It's obviously 1960s technology, VTR. They built it, they designed it in the 60s, and they started at the end of 1960. I think maybe 1970 was their startup. So they are doing experiments still to improve on their fuels, on their materials in those commercial reactors. And that's partly how they achieved 80% availability. They have very few fuel failures now. And in addition to that, as I said, Bor 60 started in the 1970s. And it is coming close to the end of its life. They are building a new one to replace Bor 60. They are going to operate Bor 60 until the new one, that MB reactor, MBIR. It has something with multi-purpose in it, irradiation reactor. I don't know all the acronyms, but MBIR is going to replace Bor 60. It's a larger 150 megawatt as opposed to 60 megawatt. It's going to have today's technology of testing capabilities, which we were trying to build into VTR as well, to support their ambitions in the fast reactor. And their next ambition, in addition to have successfully demonstrated that they can continuously improve the sodium technology, now their next step appears to be going into lead-cooled reactor area. And so they are building this test reactor partly also to support that effort, which they are going to do in parallel again. We don't like do it that way in United States, apparently, but they do these things in parallel. They are building a demonstration reactor for a lead-cooled reactor, but at the same time, they are building a lead loop inside their ambient reactor to test the nitride fuels and the materials associated with it, which they don't have a lot of experience on. So Russia is very serious in basically cornering the market for the fast reactors for the future. And unfortunately, we have some catch up to do.
And let me stay with this for one more moment. So if Russia corners that market, what does that mean in terms of selling around the world and selling in third-party markets?
Well, they already have sold that to China. And the Chinese fast reactor program, and by the way, the Chinese are now claiming that by the middle of the century, more than half of their fleet are going to be fast reactors because of the fuel cycle advantages. So they have already sold that technology to China. And it is likely that many other countries will start going in that direction because of the fuel cycle advantages that the fast reactors have. One of the things that we need to pay close attention to, when people go into the fast reactor business, it is very quickly followed by recycling materials. And when that happens, if United States is not at the table for how we are going to recycle those materials, what the safeguards will be, and what the operating protocol will be for those reactors, even if we don't have those reactors in this country, if we are not at the table, they say Russia and China will call the shots on the protocol on how these fast reactors will be operated. So I am concerned from that perspective as well, that we are missing the boat, and pretty soon they will dominate not only the market in terms of economics, but also the policies and the protocols and the safeguards associated with it.
Thank you so much, Kamal. I want to shift from talking about our adversaries to talking about our allies. Jackie, in the report, you talk about the potential for U.S. civil nuclear allies to cooperate around the VTR. So what does this mean in practice?
Sure, yeah. I mean, one of the big recommendations of the report is that the United States, immediately revive and restore conversations on a bilateral and multilateral basis with our international allies around what it would mean to collaborate, cooperate, jointly fund a versatile test reactor. And a lot of our international civil nuclear allies are hungry for an alternative to the Bore 60 or MBIR, as are many domestic developers, over how are we going to test these new reactors that each of our respective countries are supporting and financing at this point. And a lot of those conversations have already been ongoing and borne fruit. France and Japan have both signed agreements with the United States over the concept of exploring opportunities to pursue fast spectrum irradiation together. There were conversations ongoing with South Korea and several other countries in the United States around this prospect. So, there are some international correlates for this. The Jules Horowitz test reactor being constructed in France, that is a multinational, multi-company effort that's ongoing. So, we've done this kind of thing before, but at the same time, it's really difficult for the United States to say, we're going to collaborate and cooperate on a jointly funded project if the United States isn't also funding and moving forward with the design of the VTR. So that's why the other key recommendation of the report is, again, to immediately restore funding in fiscal 24 for at least annual appropriations for the VTR to facilitate those kinds of international conversations over, can we develop an international fast spectrum testing capability together.
Jackie, thank you so much. And John, I want to give you a chance also to talk a little bit about the international piece. And maybe another way of thinking about this question is, what are the implications for international civil nuclear partnerships if the United States continues to lack this capability?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I certainly will work against us and continue to work against us. And other countries, they want to work with us. But if we lack essential capabilities like that, it's going to make it harder for us to at least keep those relationships as strong. That might be forced to rely on other countries. Now, there are capabilities, things like the Joyo facility in Japan, which we understand they're trying to bring back. It's not going to offer nearly the suite of capabilities that a VTR would. It would help. I mean, there are some things like that can be done. And I think it really is going to be important for us to have these sorts of capabilities because, going back to Kamal's point, we are in a global competition in this space, both on the sort of the research and partnership side, but also on the commercialization side. We've got companies right now. TerraPower is trying to build a fast spectrum reactor. Oklo is trying to commercialize a fast spectrum reactor. They can bring those things to market, but based on what they know now and with a lot of the fuel experience from gained from EBR2 over the years, for example. But they really, they're going to need this capability going forward to be able to continue to improve and stay ahead of the competition. So I think it really is essential that we move forward with a project like this on a multinational basis. And I do think, going back to my time in DOE, so as Kamal remembers, before I joined NEI, when I was running the nuclear energy office in DOE, it's when we started the VTR project. And we started it with the full endorsement of our Nuclear Energy Advisory Committee, which saw as one of the main drivers for this facility the opportunity to craft more international partnerships and put the U.S. In an even stronger leadership position going forward. The bottom line is the world is going to need tools like this, all right? And the opportunity is there for us to seize now, and if we can seize it in the near term, we can enjoy the benefits for decades to come.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, John. And I think one of the best ways of kind of understanding this and understanding the relationship between the VTR and the next generation of advanced nuclear technologies, that, of course, I've learned this from Kamal, is that you can either be like Apple, you can have a company like Apple that continues to innovate, or you can be a company like Betamax that basically produces one thing and it's a great product, but it doesn't continue the innovation. And it seems like there is a consensus forming, especially in the United States and especially at the political levels, about the importance of nuclear energy innovation, and of course, nobody wants to be Betamax. But how do we get from where we are right now, in your opinion, Kamal, to a fully realized nuclear energy innovation ecosystem?
Yeah, one of the things that I think it is important for us to recognize when a project gets canceled, of course we get upset, but we also need to recognize what we were able to do in the last 10, 15 years when we start looking at our nuclear energy infrastructure and realize that we were falling way behind. So we have done quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So we don't want to forget that. We have probably now have the world's best post-irradiation examination capability. Mm-hmm. That we had zero when I first went to Idaho National Laboratory about 19 years ago. Mm-hmm. We had lost almost everything. Mm-hmm. Today, we probably have the world's best capabilities. The treat reactor, I forgot to mention that when we were talking about the old reactors. Treat reactor was also, for the same purpose, for the same reasons, was shut down in early 1990 because we didn't think we will need it. Mm-hmm. But we were able to bring that back up, and it's been operating for the last 3-4 years. It's doing a lot of international collaborations in terms mm-hmm. of the testing capabilities and doing experiments. It's fully booked. The question that we were asked when we first approached DOE and then Congress about restarting TREAT was, who's going to use it? Mm-hmm. Today, it's fully booked, and people are waiting in line to field new experiments. So with that long prelude, what I want to get to is I truly believe, in my opinion, the big items, ticket items left in the nuclear energy innovation infrastructure area is a fast spectrum test capability, which is lacking in U.S. It's lacking in the world, except in Russia. And the other part, it's always the stuff that deals with radiative materials that takes 10, 15 years to build. Those are the ones that we have to fill in very quickly so that we are not late to the game again. The other one is to research capabilities, a larger scale research capabilities to deal with the fuel cycle. So those two, in my opinion, are the two missing pieces right now. If we had those two today, I can assure you that very quickly we can get even ahead of Russia, even though they have started 20, 30 years ahead of us.
And while we're talking about the time frame, so we made progress from 2018 to 2021 on the VTR and on building this capability, and then stopped. And so my question to you, Kamal, I want to stay with you for one more moment. Where would we have to start? We would have to start over again, right? If we decided that we wanted at some point in the future to pursue the VTR. So what are the implications for that and for kind of starting over?
Well, if we can start quickly, I think we can probably recover a lot of the stuff that we were able to, because at least in this case, it wasn't one of those decisions that came overnight and told us to shut it down the next morning. So it gave us a little bit of heads up. So we were able to archive the stuff and put things in place. So if we are able to start in the next few years, we can probably recover a lot of that stuff. But more importantly, we can recover the people who were working on it. But if it's another one of those cycles where we wait another 10, 15 years, and I think at that point we will have to restart all over again. And I'm not sure the conditions will be the same 10, 15 years, because the way I see it, Russia and China is going to be in a totally different space by that time. So we may have to do something even bigger or better or faster than VTR if we ever want to catch up at that time.
Mm-hmm. Kamal, thank you. Jackie, so in the report, you trace the funding that the VTR project received from fiscal year 2018 to fiscal year 2021. And of course, as we know, the budget has now been zeroed out. So what would the resumption of full funding mean for the project, and why is this so crucial?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the project overall got $215 million over maybe 4 fiscal years, which is good, but it didn't get us where we needed to be, unfortunately. I would say if we resume funding as we should, at least under the regular appropriation cycle, then we really do show that we are working as a country to reclaim this mantle of global civil nuclear leadership that everybody else here has been talking about. I think the roadmap is there for it. There's still a good 4 or 5 years of authorized funding into the 500 millions per fiscal year for some of these, but certainly at least to fund the rest of the design work at 150 million over the next 5-6 years. Get to that point, again, like we talked about, that really does get us in a good operating position for this continual conversation with our international allies around a potential global user facility. And the ability, and I think we've touched on this a bit, but focusing so much as Congress does annually through annual appropes on the cost, the ability to recoup some of that initial outlay through assessing user fees on users of the facility going forward is one clear way that you would be recouping some of that funding to the U.S. Treasury and the U.S. taxpayer, but certainly too the different economic benefits, the reactor improved economics that we've talked about. It's that initial upfront cost, but that then you get a lot out of.
Thanks, Jackie. And as Kamal mentioned before, cost is relative.
Right.
So kind of if you can say sort of in a nutshell, how would you make this case for the resumption of full funding again?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what I would say too is, in conversation with, congressional offices and staffers, is look at all of the other key functions that the United States and key levers that you all are enabling to ensure that there is a bright future for advanced nuclear going forward. We have the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program out of the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, where we will be supporting 2 full demos of 2 advanced reactors by the end of the decade, supporting reduction of risk for many other promising designs in the U.S. The Nuclear Energy Office supporting the HALEU availability program, making sure that we're building out the domestic capacity for enriched fuels that we need for new reactors. Every year, the Nuclear Energy Office supports hundreds of university and national lab-led projects that are critical to this ecosystem. We're doing all of these things with the certainly the Inflation Reduction Act, production and investment tax credits that really are clearing all of these key hurdles for advanced nuclear to support a clean energy future. And at the same time, we're still leaving this one key pillar of the nuclear innovation ecosystem to lag, which is really myopic. And it's not too late, I think, if people recognize that there's this key function that we still need to support. I think would be key.
Thank you, Jackie. And John, I want to ask you, if we can assume that at least for the near term, the United States will continue to lack a fast spectrum testing capability, what are some of the options that the U.S. nuclear energy industry has?
So thank you for the question. I promise I'll get to it eventually. All right.
Sure.
There are a couple of other thoughts I wanted to share just based on this conversation, which I think was excellent. Jackie makes the point about things like ARDP, frankly, leaping ahead, I'd say, of VTR. Going back to the history that Kamal and I share with this, part of the reason we proposed the VTR when we did was Congress had directed Annie, even before I was there, to go off and study whether it made sense to go forward with a test reactor or a demonstration reactor, right? And at the time, we thought, you know what, the commercial industry isn't going to be ready for a demo for a while. Let's get the VTR in up front, right? And then the demand will arrive. Will it arrive faster than we ever thought? That's a great thing, okay? And the fact that now we've got, I've got member utilities who are including new nuclear in their integrated resource plans. That's fantastic. That's exactly what we're going to need to get to an affordable, reliable, low-cost, low-carbon energy system. But unfortunately, what it's done is it's put a lot of pressure on things like demonstration projects that I think have made VTR, I think, fall down the priority list a little bit. I don't think it's lack of support for the idea. I think it's, in my experience at least, I think it's more about staging. and what goes first. To this question about paying for it, just to, again, echo something I think both Jackie and Kamal got to, I think there's an opportunity for very significant international financial contribution, just to put a fine point on it, right? I think that we could find that our allies are willing to pay a significant share of the freight of building this facility in return for access to it. Right now, that's not easy. There's a lot of negotiation that goes into something like that, but these sorts of things happen. You mentioned the Jules Horowitz project. My old boss, Lynn Orr at DOE, talked about the Large Hadron Collider as another example of a project that was done in such a way. So I think there are opportunities to do that. Kamal mentioned the treat facility and the capabilities at the INL. That got me thinking back to the fact that I think we'll be celebrating the 75th anniversary next year of the INL. It started out as the National Reactor Testing Station in 1949. And it reminded me of the role that Bill Magwood played in ensuring that these capabilities stayed in existence. Now, things like EBR-2, unfortunately, had been shut down. But things like TREAT were allowed to stay in mothballs for more than 20 years, right? Because he and the broader NE saw that ultimately we were going to need these capabilities and we shouldn't waste them. When I started in DOE in the late 80s, I'm sorry to say, we had 5 large test reactors, right? FFTF went away. But so did the high flux beam reactor, right, and EBR-2. And so we've only got the 2 left. And Bill saw that we got to keep these things because once you lose them, they're really hard to bring back. And so back to this question about a next generation test reactor, to me, it's a question of when, not if. I think we're going to make this investment. And frankly, things, ATR is 56 years old now. We're going to need a new capability there to support the Navy over the long term. I think there are investments like that we need to make. I think we're going to make them. It looks like the demonstrations are going first, but I think ultimately we'll be able to make this case. In the interim, what's going to happen, to the question you started with, I think we're going to have to continue to rely on, I'd say, next best solutions in the short term, right? And whether that's international facilities, there are some techniques you can use that aren't quite as good as irradiating in a fast spectrum that you can probably rely on. There's maybe more that can be taken mind out of the data that's been generated. Kamal could probably go on longer than I could about the other approaches that could be used to support the industry in the absence of the VTR. But I ultimately think that a strong case has been made for this capability, and ultimately we are going to make the investment to bring it here to the U.S.
John, thank you so much. I want to turn to, I think, all 3 panelists because we are nearly out of time, but just ask for your concluding thoughts and what you would say to the political decision makers about the VTR. Kamal.
Well, I think that question lines up well with I wanted to comment on what Jackie said and John said is first about the priorities, demonstration versus test capabilities. One message that I would like to be able to convey, which apparently we have failed to do it eloquently enough, is if we are serious about U.S. taking the leadership in advanced reactor technologies, I think thinking about it in terms of what is the priority, which one we are going to do first, which one we are going to do second, doesn't make any sense at all. I think if we are serious about it, we do both, just like what Russia is doing. So I wouldn't necessarily go in that this is higher priority than the other one. I think we either do both or we don't do either and say we are not going to play in that specific area. The other one I want to mention is on the international side. John is right and Jackie is right that there is a lot of potential for international collaborations, but not at a stage where we are still debating the way we are debating whether or not we can afford VTR. Now, Jackie mentioned some numbers, and with inflation and everything, I'm sure the numbers will change. But the design phase was about $150 million a year for 5 years, and then once we get into construction, about $500 million a year for a year. If we can finish the design, and if we can break the ground, and if our international partners see that we are serious about this project, because we broke ground and we are going to complete it at that time. I think there will be a lot of them at the table. But if we go to them right now and say, pitch in some money and let us finish the design, they're going to say no. And I don't blame them.
Kamal, thank you so much. Jackie?
Yeah, I'll just say I'm in the when not if camp. Of course, we got to build it, and also the let's do both at the same time camp. I think in conversation with appropriators and their staff, I'd say look, there is an energy and water top line for the budget every year, and that can be tough. So are there other vehicles to look at for prospectively funding and forward funding, the VTR, to make sure that this capability comes online on a timeline that's relevant for the deployment of new nuclear?
Jackie, thank you. And John?
Well, the first thing I would tell or say to policymakers is thank you. Thank you for the level of investment that they've put into nuclear energy technology in recent years. Thank you for the bipartisan support we've seen for very helpful legislation, really across the board. I'd also say thank you for the incentives that have been put in to not just preserve existing nuclear generation, but to chart a path towards the next generation of nuclear technology. To have nuclear on par with other carbon-free forms of generation starting in 2025 from a tax incentive perspective is just a sea change for the outlook for the technology. I would also say that while they've made tremendous investments, and those investments have already borne some fruit in terms of the level of interest that I described earlier, other investments are going to be needed. And I think Kamal is right. To fully capitalize on the opportunity that exists now, we're going to have to invest beyond the demonstrations into research capabilities if we're going to really seize this opportunity to lead this next generation of global nuclear energy development.
Thank you so much, John. So I think we're out of time, unfortunately. I think we could continue this conversation for a whole another hour, but we do have to wrap up. I want to thank our speakers, Kamal and Jackie and John, and thank you again to Jackie and the Good Energy Collective for this incredible report. I hope everybody reads it, please. And finally, I want to thank my Atlantic Council colleagues, Maya Sparkman, Jesus Fernandez, Lucero Flores, Jasper Gilardi, and Eamon Coughlin. And thank you, finally, to our audience for tuning in this evening. Hope to see you all soon.